let's go through some essays. So this is one that we've already done. So if I ask you some questions about it, I would expect you to be able to answer them quickly. So let's start with the introduction. What is this? That's the hook or the attention grabber. So this should be a quote that grabs my attention enough for me to go, yeah, that's kind of wow. Couple of small things here. In American English, we always tuck the period inside the quote mark if we don't have a citation. So that should go there. We then, after the quote, explain what the quote means. After the explanation, we should then have a bridge. And a bridge should have a word that goes up to the quote and then goes down to the thesis. So it makes sense because there are a lot of changes. Changes connects to, let me bold that, development taking place during the transition into adulthood. So a transition into adulthood is really about the teen brain. Now, this is not the best bridge only because the thesis is weak. Look at it. Some of which include being more emotional and more vulnerable. First of all, that's not a complete sentence, and it doesn't really connect to the prompt, which is a teen brain, because you're writing about a teen brain. So, some of the changes in a teen brain include being more emotional and vulnerable. This will then connect very nicely because now within this bridge, I've got a connection up, changes, development to the quote, and I've got a connection down, transition into adulthood. What's the transition into adulthood? Teen. So now this bridge makes perfect sense. So let's take a look at this thesis. The thesis should tell me what the two body paragraphs are, so I can never evaluate the thesis without looking at the two body paragraphs. My first body paragraph, my topic sentence is, teenagers have abnormal behaviors because of the way their brain evolves. My second body paragraph. Furthermore, not only does teenage brain development cause obscure emotions and responses, but also creates vulnerability within them. Looking at these two topic sentences, what are you going to say about this thesis? Hopefully you identified that the first trait, emotional, doesn't tie neatly to my first body paragraph. There's nothing in this first topic sentence that says emotional. Now, once I get into the actual paragraph, you will see that it does talk about emotions a lot. So it does kind of sort of connect, but the fact is that the topic sentence should definitely have a strong connection to the thesis. So probably I'm going to fix this by doing something like, teenagers have abnormal behaviors because of the way their brain and emotions evolve. And if I don't want to repeat emotions, there's such a thing as synonyms. Remember, you can use the thesaurus, just don't use it to find a completely new word. So at this point, now I can see emotional feelings, vulnerability. So now this thesis is really good. So looking at the body paragraphs, my first sentence is called clearly it's a topic sentence. So that should be the umbrella that the entire topic fits under. Then I should say, okay, how does the brain and how do the brain and feelings evolve? Why do they evolve? I should have a how or a why. And in this case, puberty is critical to the emotional roller coaster of life that teens are on. So my first, how does it evolve? It evolves as a roller coaster. What do I call that second sentence? Yep, that is a claim. After my claim, I then have this section right here. What is that section? I seriously hope you just said that that is your evidence. And in this case, it's really nice. I've got multiple pieces of evidence. Let me put that in highlighting so we can kind of keep track of it. I have multiple pieces of evidence. The evidence is nice little fragments here, so I don't have big, giant sections that are copied out. So that's very, very nice. Does this prove that puberty is a bit of a roller coaster? Yeah. If you look at it, it does. That you have the hormones that increase sensitivity, that you're more self-conscious. Well, being increasingly sensitive and being more self-conscious, that definitely feels a little bit like a roller coaster to me. So it does support the claim. So, what comes after evidence? And if you notice, every sentence of evidence, there are three sentences of evidence. Each one of those three sentences is cited. So, what comes after evidence? I really hope you just said that that's where we're going to have commentary. And this is where you're going to have a type of reasoning. If puberty didn't create hormones, there would be no changes. What type of reasoning is that? Yeah, that's contrast. If this didn't happen, here would be the results, but that's not what we see. And so we do have a nice contrast commentary there. So even though what we're doing is explaining, rather than trying to persuade people that the limbic system is real, we still use the same types of commentary. So we then have a transition, more eminently, a little bit awkward, just because eminent isn't a word that I would normally expect from a teenager. And the vocabulary in the rest of the paper isn't so high that I'm like, yeah, this is a kid that's going to use eminent. So I would expect to see something like more significantly, far more importance, more importantly, eminent is feeling a little out of place because it doesn't quite match the vocabulary of the rest of the paper. But I do like it here anyway, even though it's a tiny bit awkward, because what do I need to have between my two arguments? Because this is my first argument. Remember, an argument is claim, evidence, commentary. So before I start my second argument, what do I need to have? Yep, I need to have a transition. And that is what we see here. That's a transition. So I should now have another claim. The emotional part of cognitive growth highly influences teens' decision making. Does that fit under abnormal behaviors because of the way the brain and feeling evolve? I'm not quite sure yet, but let's take a look. We then have evidence. Okay, again, I love the evidence because there's lots, every sentence is cited, and it doesn't support that the cognitive growth influences teen decision making. Well, I don't know. Is reasoning, planning, and judgment? Is it the fact that that kids need to learn strategies for in the moment decisions because otherwise they risk adolescent behaviors? Is that about influencing teen decisions? Yes, it is. So this evidence very much supports the claim that the emotional part of cognitive growth highly influences teen decision making. So what do we then have here? Yep, that is commentary. Now, if it's commentary, you should have a type of reasoning in there. What type of reasoning do you see? Yeah, this is a comparison. And it's comparing teenagers to clueless puppies that bite the sofa. Now, do be a little bit careful because if I were a teenager, I might find that slightly offensive. And you do have to be careful with comparison commentary that you don't write a comparison that offends the snot out of people, where people are like, wait a minute. But in this case, I kind of like that but then I'm not a teenager, so I don't know what your guys' thoughts are on that particular comparison. But there is a very strong comparison. Now, the other thing you need in addition to reasoning is you have to go back to your topic, abnormal behaviors because of the way their brain and feeling evolve. Do we have abnormal behaviors? Yep, not in their right mind. Do we have because of how their brain and their feelings evolve? Well, we have a reference to feelings. Um, they got caught up in how they felt at the time. So, do we have a type of reasoning? Yes. Do we have a return to the topic? Yes. So, is that good commentary? Yes. What should I have at the end of every paragraph? Hopefully, you didn't say a conclusion because that's a paragraph. No, we should have a closure sentence. Closure sentence has three parts. What is this? Yep, that is a closing transition. So you can say something like, in short, in the end, in the final analysis, ultimately, after looking at this. So you can have a lot of different closing transitions. You also might want to check your book to see if they include a list of closing transitions because some years they do on the actual PBA. I should then have indubitably is an intensifier. After you've given me an entire paragraph, you should be able to say, yes, absolutely, I told you I was true. Now, this is not as important in an explanation essay as when you're trying to persuade someone of something that's a little bit more controversial. But it is still nice to have it here, not as critical. And then, of course, what is the most critical part? Yeah. The most critical part is you have to repeat what the topic was. So, this is a beautiful body paragraph. And that's really the last time we're going to spend a lot of time talking about body paragraphs because you should already know how to do a body paragraph. So, you then have a second body paragraph that the student wrote, and then you have, oh, and by the way, love it, colon sentence. That makes people happy. And if I go through here and if I were to go through and look at all this, you've got a colon sentence, you have a DCIC sentence, you actually have quite a few different types of sentences in here. The vocabulary is perhaps not as high as the one we're going to look at, but here's another DCIC. You do have some really nice sentence structures in here. So let's take a look at the conclusion. Undoubtedly, feeling excessively emotional and feeling unguarded are only two of the many effects of an adolescent. What is that? Yep, you are repeating the thesis and you're doing it in different words. Next up, people go through more changes in the brain during their teen years than they do during the rest of their lives, doubled. Yep, that is a reference to the opening hook because you can see in this hook, 80% of brain development takes place during adolescence. So then, hopefully, people, parents, and teens included, will educate themselves on these changes and take necessary precautions to deal with them. Otherwise, the results could be disastrous. What is that? Yep, that is a reference out to the real world. And you do see that this is the section that has two sentences. So I think this is what the student thinks is really important. Not quite as fully developed as I would think from an A paper, but this is an A paper and this is very, very well done. So you see the clear three parts of a conclusion sentence here. Now let's take a look. So it hits all the requirements, great evidence, awesome commentary, clear signs of editing for syntax, some for diction, maybe not as much. First topic sentence was definitely weak because we had to change it. Also, I didn't put in here, but the thesis was a fragment. And that's important. The thesis is the most important sentence in the paper And if that one sentence is a fragment or if that one sentence has an error in it, it's going to show up more than anything else. There is some low level vocabulary. Did we have like thing? Nope. So I'm not going to go through and look because I don't want to search for the whole thing. But oh, hello, right there. Yeah, a lot. So there is some low level vocabulary in here, and I'd have to go through and look to see where else you have. Ooh, nice semicolon. But you do have some lower level vocab in there. And then the hook doesn't bring anything new or exciting. Because the hook came from the reading itself, it's not anything that makes me go, wow, I didn't know that. And so it functions as a hook. It's perhaps not exciting as a hook. So that's why this paper got a 94. It has everything in it. This student clearly knows every part of how to write a paper, but there were just some slips. So let's take a look at this. Here we have an intro. We've got body, paragraph, topic, sentences. The body paragraphs are gone, and then conclusion. So let's take a look at some intros and some topic sentences because some of you did focus and struggle more on the intro. So I want to focus there. So, one of the functions of intelligence is to take into account the dangers that come from trusting solely to the intelligence. What is that? Yep, that's your hook. Tell me one thing that's good here and tell me one thing that needs to be fixed. Okay, you can pull a couple of things about what's good about this. It's nice that this person pulled something that was not in the reading, so it's new to me. It's not something that's like, yeah, I already read that. I just read that, in fact, because I just read the packet. It is definitely on task because it's going to be talking about the teen brain. And so intelligence and the brain are closely related. So that's definitely on topic. So you could have talked about that. However, the thing that's funky is you have this set up almost like a citation as if this was evidence. This is not evidence. And I don't want to use a citation to suggest it is. So that means I want to use an attribution up front. Lewis Mumford once said, and this is a formal quote. I've got a little phrase that introduces and then a complete sentence on the end, which is why I do want to have this structure with a comma, a quote mark, and a capital letter. That's what we do when we have a formal quote where we've got a phrase introducing a complete sentence. And then I can take out this weird pseudo citation. Now, where should this period go? Yep, I just told you. If you don't have a citation, the period has to go inside the quote mark. So you then should have an explanation of the quote. This suggests a person who's truly smart will not trust their own brain all the time. And that is a correct explanation of the quote. So that explanation works well. So, what is this? That is the bridge. If it's the bridge, it's going to have a word or two that goes up to the quote. One of the functions of intelligence is to take account of the dangers that come from trusting solely to intelligence. So you can't trust that there's dangers in trusting. Well, that seems to link to the idea of betray. The teen brain, that seems to link to adolescence. So I've got a reference to the opening quote. I've got a reference to the thesis. So that's a very nicely done bridge. Now, I need to now evaluate the thesis. But remember, I'm always going to evaluate the thesis according to how well it links to the two topic sentences. So, what do you think of this thesis? Yeah, that's a great thesis. So the first one is about how adolescent brain performs well. That connects me to advantages. My second one is it has some critical disadvantages. Well, that directly connects to dire disadvantages. So that thesis is beautiful, perfect, love it. What do we think of the two topic sentences? This is great. Leads me exactly where I'm going to go. The second body paragraph, if you look up here at your second body paragraph, um, here I have a very complete connection to the previous paragraph. Not only does the teenage brain development cause obscure emotions and responses, that's what this first body paragraph is all about, before it then goes into what the new body paragraph is going to be. Here, it seems to jump straight to this is what my new body paragraph is going to be. So it's an acceptable topic sentence, but that transition is not as complete because it doesn't bridge from the previous paragraph. So a better transition might be something like, well, the teen brain functions well in many circumstances. The adolescent brain has some critical disadvantages. This section right here now reminds me of what the previous paragraph was. So it functions like a bridge, just like the bridge in your introduction. So this references the previous paragraph. This tells me what the next paragraph is going to be. So when I copied and pasted, I got rid of some tabs. Every body paragraph must be tabbed in. So now let's look at the conclusion. What is this? That's a little tricky because that is part of the thesis. The thesis is the teen brain has many advantages and disadvantages. This says in the final analysis, the teen brain can function well despite the fact many people assume teenagers can't think. It's just the advantages. So, what do we have then here? The research simply doesn't support that assumption. That's still talking about the advantages. However, teenagers have to realize that their brain do have a few important flaws. Well, there's the disadvantages. A teen can get into trouble if he doesn't recognize that fact. That's still kind of disadvantages. So, whoa, they took 4 sentences to repeat the thesis. I'm not sure it's ideal, but I will tell you this. I definitely see that this teen thinks that the thesis, the fact that the teen brain has both advantages and disadvantages, is the most important part because they really emphasize that thesis by repeating multiple sentences. I then have my next structure because I start with repeat the thesis. Well, don't repeat it. Tie back to the thesis. What is the next sentence you should have? Yep, you should reference the opening quote, the opening hook, and this does that. Then what is the last section in conclusion? Yep, that's the real world connection. And so you can see this has the same 3 parts. But up here, 1 sentence, 2 sentences. They're emphasizing that the real world is what's important. Here, 4 sentences, 1 sentence, 1 sentence. So what they're emphasizing here is that it's the fact that you have advantages and disadvantages that's important. So which of those 3 sections you spend more time on is what tells you what's more important. So let's take a look at another one. Good heavens, when I copied and pasted, a lot of these indents vanished. Okay. Thousands of years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle thought that the brain was a radiator that kept the heart cool. Wow, that's stupid. He thought all important emotions and thought came from the heart muscle because muscles are great at thinking. Hundreds of years later, a Roman doctor thought that the 4 parts of the brain controlled personality and bodily functions. Galen was much closer, but he still did not understand the true complexities of the brain. The teen brain is overly emotional, and those emotions lead to poor decision making in teens. So, what is this? Hopefully you said that's the attention getter. And this time, instead of using a quote, it gave background information. And this is a great attention grabber. It's a great hook because dang, I didn't know that. And so the fact that this student is bringing up something I didn't know makes me want to read the paper because I'm like, dude, if you're smart enough to know stuff I don't know, I want to read that paper. So that's a great hook. I also had some other people talk about the Egyptians and their belief about brain. So I actually had a couple of different people did some historical stuff that really, really worked well. What is this? Yep, that is a bridge. If it is a bridge, what word in this connects me up to my hook? Yep, the word Galen connects me up to the hook. What word in this bridge connects me down to my thesis? Yep, the thesis is about brain, so that connects down. I then have the teen brain is overly emotional, and those emotions lead to poor decision making. Does my first trait in the thesis connect to my first topic sentence? Yes or no? Yes, because my first trait is emotional. My first topic sentence is all about emotions. Does the second trait in this thesis, does it connect to my second topic sentence? Yes. Poor decision making connects directly to terrible decisions. Do proofread. A teen can make terrible decisions. I can't tell you how many of you left like S off the end of stuff or added S. So do make sure that you are double checking stuff. So that is an awesome thesis because it clearly ties to my two body paragraphs. I have the three sections with my hook, my bridge, and my thesis. So let's take a look at the conclusion. What is this? Yep, that is restating the thesis in new words. Excellent. What is this? Yep, that is a reference up to the hook. And what is this? Yep, that is how that affects the real world. So that is all good. I will tell you this is feeling a little like a formula. This is not as strong. I mean, it's fine. That's what I would expect from kids that get B's because you've got 1, 2, 3 parts. But when I compare it to this, where it's like the kid feels passionate about the fact that there are advantages and disadvantages. When I compare it to this, where there's, if not passion, at least some emphasis on that the real world is important. Here, this feels a little bit more like a formula where teacher says I have to do 1, 2, 3. I will do 1, 2, 3. So I'm not feeling like the kid is necessarily as passionate about anything. So that perhaps is not as strong, but that will certainly get you a good solid B. And if your body paragraphs are strong A's, you may still get A's even with a pretty formulaic conclusion. Okay, so we're then back to a paper that we did in class. Now, this person used spaces to try and tab over. And so the tab doesn't really go far enough. So please do hit the actual tab key because you can see how much farther it goes in. If you were going to do old school typewriter, because the old school typewriters didn't always have a tab, then the standard would be 5 spaces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But let's be honest, you're better off just hitting tab instead of trying to space it. Tab. So those 2 spaces, definitely not enough to show the break between paragraphs. So I need to have 4 or 5 clear paragraphs. Please use the tab key. Okay, this obviously is going to be your hook. It is a quote hook and it pulls it from the reading, so not as exciting. You then have your bridge. Okay, And then in class, we talked about the fact that this thesis has got a major problem. As always, a thesis is only as good or bad as how well it connects to the topic sentences. So let's look at that. Teenagers have substandard brains is your first topic sentence. On the other hand, adolescent teen brains mature into excellence is your second topic sentence. So, based off of these two topic sentences, what are you thinking of that thesis? Yeah. The teenage brain starts a mess certainly connects to substandard, but you have no connection to adolescent brains maturing to excellence. And so this thesis is wrong. And that is a pretty big deal because the thesis is the roadmap for your entire essay. So during the younger stage of adolescence, the teenage brain starts a mess before it develops into a far more powerful structure. Kind of just pulling it out. But that would work because then I would be able to see, okay, starts a mess is my first body paragraph, develops into something better is my second body paragraph. But if you stop here, that is going to be a pretty big ding on your grade. Already, this can't get an A. This is already struggling to get a B because the thesis is unclear. So, let's now take a look. These adolescent brains are fallible because of their susceptibility to malicious influences. This is clear when teen brains are shown to lean more on their rancor and sadness rather than rational thought. Because of how young teen brains are, they're more susceptible to drugs, which is present when adults are said to have more developed brains, which makes the teen brain much worse against drugs. So we have a claim. Why are they substandard? Because of the susceptibility to outside influences. What is that sentence in yellow? Yep, that's a claim, and it's a good claim. Why is it substandard? Because it's susceptible to malicious influences. So that's great. The evidence does, in fact, show susceptibility. The evidence is cited. The evidence is wrong. That is not a direct quote. And that is a huge deal. When you put things between quote marks, you are saying, I am copying exactly out of the text. And by putting it into a quote mark, when in fact, I'm sure that what happened is the student changed the wording in order to get in better vocabulary. But if you change the wording, you are no longer quoting, you are summarizing. That is good evidence. With quote marks, it's not. Be very, very careful with what you quote. The same is true here. That is not a quote. You cannot have quote marks. Do not screw up your quotes. Okay? So let us take a look here. What is this longer section here? Yep, that's commentary. If it is correct commentary, it will include a type of reasoning. What type of reasoning do you see here? Yep, that's contrast. If youthful brains weren't underdeveloped, they would control their emotions, but they don't, which is why you've got poor decision making. If it is good commentary, it will have a return to the topic of the idea of substandard brains. Well, look at what words I have here. We are tying directly to substandard. So this is beautiful commentary. So that's really, really well done. Now let's talk about what I have underlined. Fallible, susceptible, malicious, rancor, susceptible, DCIC sentence, DCIC sentence, colon sentence, detrimental, DCIC sentence, conjunctive adverb sentence, This has beautiful editing. I am seeing high level vocabulary. I am seeing high level sentence structures. I'm seeing multiple high level sentence structures. Um, DCIC, obtaining, exemplary. The structure here, the commentary here, not quite as good, but this is still acceptable level. I've got a semicolon only sentence here. That's beautiful. I've got another DCIC sentence here. And so the writing here is just absolutely beautifully controlled. But again, we have another problem here. Do you want to guess what this problem is? I've even highlighted it. Hint. Yeah, the problem here is what I have put into bold is in fact a direct quote. Up here, you had things in quote marks that weren't word for word out of the packet. But here, I have things that are word for word out of the packet that aren't in quote marks, which means this evidence is also incorrect. I need to add quote marks. Okay, now I want you to look at this evidence section and I want you to tell me what in here is now really well done. Oh, so many things that you could talk about here. You could talk about the fact that it really supports the claim that brains are great because they can perform feats like an adult. They've got great decision making, that 80% of the brain develops. And so that all shows that it's truly great. So the evidence is supporting the claim. You also, now that you have quote marks, really are showing that you have pulled little fragments out instead of copying entire sentences. That's also great. I also love the fact you have evidence from two different places that's pulled together. And that makes it really feel like you're not just repeating what one of the articles says, but you're looking at both articles, you're comparing them, and you're pulling similarities out of the two articles. That's great. So you could have said any of those, and I would say, yes, you're absolutely right. Now, here's a little ticky tacky grammar rule. In English, you're actually not allowed to start with a number that's typed out that way. So you would have to actually write the word 80 only because it's at the beginning of a sentence. Now, it's not written out as 80 in the packet, so you could fix that a couple of ways. Either put it in brackets, which tells the reader, I've changed something, but I have only changed it to fix the grammar. Or you could just start the quote here and just leave 80 out. I would probably put it in square brackets. Why? Because that's me showing off to the reader. I know that I can change the grammar inside a quote if I put it in square brackets. Okay, so let's now go into, and here we go. Incredible syntax, strong diction. First body paragraph hits every requirement. Second body paragraph is not equally strong. It kind of feels like one big argument instead of having two separate arguments. So I can see here that's the commentary, but the commentary feels pretty weak. It doesn't have a good type of reasoning here. And then down here, when you get into the commentary, now we're seeing some cause and effect. So that commentary is a little stronger. But this body paragraph, definitely not as strong as the first one. But the thesis is not at the end of the paper. Oh, dear. Oh, the conclusion. Yeah, that's not a good. It's not a good restatement of the thesis. And the big one, the quotes are wrong. That is such a big one. Now, why would that still earn a 79? Because honestly, um, being that the quotes are wrong, it probably should have gotten a D because misquoting is a big deal when you are writing academically. You can't quote people wrong. However, oh my gosh, this writing is just so stupid awesome. I mean, semicolon only, conjunctive adverb semicolons, DCICs, colons, variety of sentence beginnings, variety of sentence lengths. The vocabulary, just the writing is like, oh my gosh, so strong that it's really hard to lower the grade down to a D level when this person does know how to write a body paragraph. They do know how to make arguments. So there's so much that's right. It's hard for me to put it at a D level, but there are teachers who would because the quotes are wrong. Now, if the 4 quote marks were removed and that paraphrase fact with the 80% were improved, this would probably move up to an 87 or 88. If the thesis were fixed, 100% this would be an A. So if we were to fix one sentence with the thesis, adding that half a sentence, deleting quote marks, 4 quote marks in here. So I hit delete 4 times, and then putting this into quotes. As it is right now, after I fix just those 3 things, this would be an A. Even though the second body paragraph, not as strong. So realize it's rarely the big stuff that catches kids, it's the little stuff. Okay, so now let's do a quick quiz. I'm going to show you a quote. You're going to tell me either that quote, that sentence is correctly cited, or you're going to tell me what the problem is. What do you think of this first one? Yeah, some of you did this. There is no Reuter argument on page 1. Look at the page numbers on the bottom of the page. This should be Reuter 8. Don't mess that up. Ready for another quick quiz? What do you think? Yep, I like this one. This one 100% works. Good job. Quick quiz. What do you think? Dude, why do you have the first name in there? When you cite, all you use is the last name and the page number of the packet that it appears on. First names? No. Quick quiz. Go. Really? Really? You should not have a period. Come on. The period comes at the end of the sentence. If this is the end of the sentence, then that means this sentence has no citation because that's the end. This is just floating out in nowhere. Get rid of that period. Ready? Quick quiz. Yeah, dude. Reuter, no. Reuter 8, not Reuter page 8. Get rid of the PG. Okay, and that is the end of our little workshop. Hopefully, you guys are ready to go, and tomorrow, whatever topic you get, you are ready to rock this.